Welcome, Colette Hamilton, to the Art of Leverage interviews. Thanks for coming along. I really appreciate it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what Imperetus does?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks, Ewan, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So Imperetus is actually a market access agency working in the life science space. And it's a niche area of marketing, probably a bit peculiar to the life science industry, actually. It's really centered around the fact that if a company produces a medical device or any new medical technology for that matter, it can take a long time to get that medical technology from proof of concept stage into a market, and then once it's in the market, make sure that the process of taking that product to the patients who need it is as comprehensive as possible. All of that takes time, all of that takes a lot of money. So our job is to reduce the amount of time it takes to get technologies to the patients who really need them, solve some of the unmet healthcare needs out there, and make sure that that's done in as an efficient a way as possible, so that costs are not being wasted throughout that whole process, because at the end of the day, the costs are being transferred to the people buying the technologies.
So, give me. So I'm thinking that, when so one of my friends works at Wockhardt, for example, and they part of the COVID vaccine thing. So getting that from concept to be approved to actually getting that out to market would be something you would help with.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, it all happened very quickly, though, didn't it, in relative terms, because it was an emergency. And sometimes some of the processes were streamlined because of that, and I suppose that's going to help moving forwards. But when you want to take something to market, obviously safety is a key issue, isn't it? So before you take something to market, you need to make sure that the technology is safe, and so that involves a lot of clinical studies and a lot of reviewing evidence and feedback from patients and feedback from customers, etc., before you can even get through the starting post. And there are processes in place all around the world, in every country, that you have to go through, so that regulators are satisfied that the product is safe, and they're also satisfied that it does what it says on the tin. In some countries, the UK being one, it's also important that the technology is affordable relative to any other treatment alternatives that are already in that market. So these are all considerations that have to be addressed by the company bringing the technology to market.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I used to work in optics years ago, and I remember when the laser eye surgery first came in. Although that did have proofs of concept and everything, there was a fair amount of disasters in the early days. So what's the biggest issue around bringing a new product to market, do you think?
I think the biggest issue is around, one of the big issues, I suppose, is understanding the process and understanding the level of information and evidence that's required to enter different markets. Typically, not all, but most of the companies are US-based companies, so they understand the requirements in the US, but they may not fully understand the requirements in the multiple other countries. And in the EU, for example, it's not just one regulatory body, or not just one set of situations that people need to consider, because there are different situations in every country. And if you go to some countries like Spain and Italy, there are even different situations in every region within the country. So
makes sense.
That's why it can be quite complex. And so our job as experts in this field is to understand what all the different nuances and requirements in each of those markets, and lead people through that process. So we're a bit like navigators or blockbusters, if you like. Because,
somebody's developed a new product, scientifically or practically minded, but they have no idea of how to actually get it through all the bureaucracy and testing and everything to actually get it to market, and that's what you help with.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously some of the big global companies, in fact, nearly all the big global companies now have in-house experts doing this work for them. But it seems that there's never enough people to do the work. So they usually, and also one person can't be an expert in every market, obviously. So, so they do tend to use outside contractors to support them through this process.
So what sort of, so does somebody who's doing this need to have a fair amount of money behind them to get this done?
To supply the service, you mean?
No, to actually need, so somebody who's developed a product and they've invested a load of money in developing the product, and now they're going, right, I need to get to the next step to get it to market. Do they need to have a fair amount of money behind them in order to make that happen?
They do, and they need to pitch it to investors. I mean, the most significant area that takes up money before you can get to market is the research, the clinical research.
Right.
That's a lot of money. So you also need to invest in usually external consultants to help you go through the regulatory approval process. Right. So the process where you get a CE mark or the process where you get FDA approval. Most people will have heard of those things because they're all over the news. But often people don't think of making sure they ring fence some money to pay for market access experts to get them over that line. And they do that to their detriment. So in two ways. One is if you go to investors and you need finance, which they do, they will. The financiers, the investors now are more switched on, and they want to know, you know, once you get entry into a market, how fast can you get the product adopted? Because we need a return on our investment. And if you don't think about what the environmental situation is in each of those markets, what the barriers are going to be, how long it's going to take you to get over the barriers, and how much it's going to cost you to get over the barriers, you don't really have a good business plan. So they need our help more and more to give investors confidence that their plans are robust. And the second way in which they need us is that they have to spend so much money, as I said, on research and development. If they're not collecting the data when they're doing the research and the development that will get them through some of those hurdles within each market, they're going to have to do more research and more research until they do get that data. So if they make mistakes in how they design their clinical trials, then those mistakes are going to cost them a lot of money. So it's much more cost effective to bring in market access specialists quite early on in the process and make sure you avoid some of those errors and missteps, if you like. So I'll give you an example. If you're doing a clinical study, but you're not, you might be collecting certain elements of clinical data, but if you're not collecting also economic data, and you don't know how cost effective a therapy is, you know it might work, but anybody in the health sector who's going to allow funding, if you like, for a new medical treatment is going to be thinking, right, well, I've got this amount of funding, I can only buy X, Y, Z. So if I bring in something new, what am I going to give up to pay for the something new? And they're all constantly making comparisons. So it's not just good enough to say, okay, this treatment works on this set of patients. They also have to answer the question, okay, it works, but does it work better than something else? And how much will it cost me to get that, you know, incremental difference in benefit for the patients? And they need to understand those issues. And often things are taken to market without answering those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with a couple of people, not on your level, who looking for investors, and the investors come back and said, show me how I'm going to make money at this.
Yeah, absolutely. And when? Not just when I'm going to make money, but when am I going to make money?
What's one of the best results you've had for a client, would you say? You know, somebody's come to you with something amazing and you've managed to get it to market. So what would you say one of your best results is?
Well, I'll give you two examples. One was with some women's health products where the client had 3 new products to take to market with good data behind them, incidentally. But in order to use those products, the surgeons had to do things in a completely different way, because the way they did things at the moment for the particular conditions, one was stress incontinence, the other one was heavy menstrual bleeding, problems with that. And the existing therapies that were considered to be a gold standard involved the surgeons working in theatre and involved the patients being admitted to hospital, whereas these new technologies allow treatments to be carried out in an office setting. So the patient could walk in and then walk out, which is usually important, especially for women, of course, because often as well as working, they're often caregivers. So spending a long time in hospital is it's something obviously to be avoided for everybody. But yeah, it's really, really amazing. But they were having difficulty, the company, in establishing these as a new gold standard. Not just because the doctors were used to doing it in the old way, but the doctors didn't have access to the right kind of facilities to do it in a different way. So structural changes were necessary, and a lot of work was needed to work with the hospital management teams, so to create new spaces and new processes to allow them to do things in a different way. So as an ex-NHS manager, I was able to go in and help them resolve that problem, and then send out teams of facilitators to help manage those change processes. So blocks come in all different shapes and forms, and what we try and do is personalize our solutions to the particular problem. Another example is a company that well, it was spun out of one of the big global multinationals in a management buyout. It was bought out by supported by venture capitalists, but they wanted to build it for sale again. They wanted a return. They wanted a return on their investment. So I wouldn't say it was all credit to me and my company, but I was asked by them to go in and open up some new markets. So I was able to go in and start to work with governments and regulators and policymakers in North America, in Australia, in some countries in Europe, and support the team working on projects in Japan that would allow those markets to be opened up for this new technology. Now, because those markets were opening up, that increased the value of the business substantially. So they were bought out, but it almost doubled the value of the business. So the investors were very happy. Yeah,
that's a great success story.
Yeah.
What do you find inspiring about what you do at Imperetus?
Well, for me, what's really inspiring is, that there are so many unmet healthcare needs out there. So many. It's crazy. And there are many different rare diseases, for example. And if you added all the rare diseases together, they're not so rare at all, because they're more common than diabetes, for example, if you added them all together. But there are no known treatments. And there are lots of inflammatory conditions, for example, where there are treatments that help the symptoms, but they don't really cure them.
Right.
And then there are other treatments. So a lot of cancer therapies, for example, are pretty effective these days, but they also have unwanted effects, unwanted side effects, and there are no solutions for those unwanted effects. And for some patients will, do well on cancer treatment and live fulfilling lives, but others will do well from the cancer treatment, but then down the line suffer chronic conditions that resulted from the toxicity of the treatment. And so finding solutions to those problems is really satisfying.
Brilliant. So what do you see anything, what's exciting about the next 12 months?
I think that's exciting. Well, the world's changed, hasn't it, since COVID, and there's a lot of geopolitical instability at the moment, and that requires new models. So Imperetus is a startup. We started during COVID, actually, with Imperetus. And what we wanted to do with Imperetus is create a new model, because the market access space in the life science industry has pretty much been the same for the last 20 years. And so because the world has changed, we wanted to create a new disruptive model that would work better for our clients and work better for patients at the end of the day. And so we looked outside of our sector and looked at what was happening in the media industry, for example. So nowadays, when a new movie is produced, you don't see one company making a movie, do you? When you look at the credits, you see multiple different companies have been involved in making that movie, and the producers or people investing in the movie use a process which you'll be familiar with called syndication, where they pull in the right experts from across the board to make that particular movie. So that's what we're trying to do with Imperetus. We're a completely different model because we don't have buildings, we don't have huge overheads, we don't use paper. So we are very flat, and what we do is we win projects from clients, and then we syndicate a solution to their problem using experts from all over the world who don't work for us except for on that project.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so we manage the project, but we can do it in a very cost-effective way, clearly, and we can scale up very quickly. And we're not carrying people who don't have very specific expertise to deal with that particular business challenge that we're dealing with at the time. And we also carry business risk, because you could say, why don't the companies do that themselves? Why don't they syndicate a solution from all of these different players? And the reason is because they may be trying to solve something that they may only have to solve once, whereas we may have to solve it multiple times. So we have the advantage of working globally with multiple different companies, and the learnings involved in all of that are immense. So we can kind of hit the ground running because we know exactly what we're doing. And it would be very difficult for a company without deep not just market access expertise, but deep insight into what's happening in all the markets. It would be difficult for them to know whether the person delivering the service is doing the right thing, whereas we do know if they're doing the right thing. So basically we're shouldering the risk, if you like, of investment in a particular project.
So it's a bit like you don't know whether somebody's done a good job for you until you've actually been somewhere else.
Exactly. Exactly.
So brilliant. So what if you, as a multiple business person, if you were going to give a new business person some advice, what would your best piece of advice to a new business starting off?
My best piece of advice would be to stay focused on every level. So stay focused on your goal. It's a lonely journey, isn't it? When you start off at first in business, it can be lonely for a long time. And it's important to stay focused, because you'll have a lot of people telling you why you shouldn't be doing this, that, or the other, and what you can't achieve and why you can't achieve it. You've got to ignore them, and you've got to stay focused on your goal. That's the first thing. The other thing is you need to stay focused on building the right network around you, because small businesses have got, the situation now is, as you know, that we're dealing with massive global companies with huge marketing budgets, and small companies are having to compete because of social media. You're having to compete against these huge marketing gorillas, in effect. And so the best way to compete against them is to do things differently and use the fact that you're small and the advantages of that. And so things like referral marketing, things like networking, and all of those things, which are much more personal, about personal relationships, about being human. You can compete using those things in ways that they can't. So you've got to use leverage. We talked about the art of leverage. That is a way to leverage the fact that you're small and use those advantages to the full. And you also have to stay focused. When I say focused on your goal, it's easy in business, isn't it, to be distracted by the process of doing business, to be distracted by shiny things that come on the horizon. But you've got to stay on track. The most successful people stay on track, because all these things you see on the internet about making lots of money online are all rubbish. They're all rubbish, because success is about doing small things consistently, day after day after day after day after day, and never giving up. So that's why I say focus.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed this. And thanks for coming on the interview.
Lovely to meet you, and we'll hope to speak soon.